Bryan Fogel.
Thanks.
You've seen it with a crowd before. What's it like watching it with having people react and laugh?
Well, it sure beats watching it on your computer on Netflix. Yeah, it's always wonderful when you get to see your film on a big screen, especially when you go through the creative process of sound and mastering and the music and all that stuff that you go through as a filmmaker to be able to have it play on a screen like this. So it's always an honor.
I guess I wanted to begin with one of the most intriguing, I think, kind of follow-up questions, I guess, for the film, and that is, so there was a CIA report or an intelligence report that suggested one of the reasons Putin may have ordered hacking on the American election in 2016 was in retaliation for this doping story?
That's right. When the CIA released their declassified report in January of this year, CIA, NSA, FBI, they listed 7 reasons why our election was hacked that they believed. And reason number 3 was for what they believed, for what Putin believed was America's involvement in embarrassing Russia with the doping scandal. And of course, that's not the case, but the assumption as part of the declassified report was that because Rodchenkov had a U.S. visa, because he was in U.S. protective custody, because the story went to the New York Times, an American paper, because the Department of Justice and FBI was protecting him, and essentially, according to the report, he viewed that as American involvement and was one of the reasons, who knows if that's the case, that he hacked our election.
When did you talk to Gregory last?
Well, I brought him into protective custody a year and 3 months ago, and things have really escalated for him. And I'll tell you when I talked to him last. A week and a half ago, his lawyers were able to facilitate that he write an op-ed for the New York Times. And that New York Times article, op-ed, if you guys read it, basically said, was begging essentially the world to not let his whistleblowing be in vain, because in the fallout of all this evidence, of everything that's come forward, there has been no punishment for Russia at all. Russia has continued to deny that this scandal exists, despite spectacular forensic evidence. It would be like coming into a graveyard with 1,000 bodies with bullets in their heads and going, there's no bullets in their heads. I mean, and it's that denial, and yet the Olympics seem just fine with that. They seem fine not to protect every clean athlete on planet Earth and the ideals that they put forward, which we are learning is purely in business and the billions and trillions of dollars of our own self-interest. There is no interest in actually protecting the clean athletes who go to those Olympic Games or compete in international competition. And Gregory, in his op-ed, if you guys read this, made this very clear, to which Russia reacted by issuing a global arrest warrant for him. And they're trying to extradite him, claiming that he is the only person involved in this scandal, that this is all his doing. I mean, truly, it's just flabbergasting. So I haven't talked to him for quite some time because I'm not able to. I don't know where he is. And in the meantime, we're being told that they're going to go they're trying to charge his wife with crimes on top of seizing all of the family assets and their passports. So if you don't believe that there's a totalitarian government in Russia, or you don't believe that 1984 exists and that this is going on in this world today and in the current U.S. administration also, I don't really know what to say. But this is happening. This is real.
There's a defense fund. Is he trying to raise money for his defense?
We launched a GoFundMe for him. And there's been about $18,000 raised so far. His legal bills are in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands on top of immigration support. And we're trying to figure out how he's going to be okay. Depending on what the results of this Department of Justice investigation is, assuming they don't move forward with it or whatever they do, which he's continued to work with our government and other governments in WADA to provide information. And but the question is what's his life going to be in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and where will he be able to go? And so we're actively trying to figure out how to help him through this GoFundMe.
How did he react to the film when he first saw it?
I haven't been able to see him, but I know from his lawyer that he was pretty elated and was moved, and he said that he was tearful and really, really kind of, I think, taken by it, because I don't think he could have imagined what I think creatively as a film we were going to put together from this story.
I wonder, by the way, so we have these two microphones, and you are welcome to ask questions or make comments anytime. You don't need to wait for me, just stand in line. I'll keep going in the meantime, because I had a lot of questions. One of them is, you see the story of Gregory's mother basically helping him cheat. Made me wonder about what you learned about Russian culture, whether there is embedded in that culture, I don't know if cheating or if in some way the intensity of Russia succeeding is built into Putin's politics or the politics of the Soviet Union before. You know what I mean?
You really grasped on something that I think is hard for us to understand from an American perspective or perhaps a Western European perspective, which is we grow up in this kind of idea, and the way that I liken it is like this. If any of you walk out of here tonight and you're pulled over by a police officer for speeding, and you say to the officer, "How about I give you $100?" 99.9% of the time you're going to wind up in handcuffs, right? Now, in Russia, if you get pulled over for speeding and you don't give the cop $100, you're going to wind up in handcuffs, right? So you have a culture coming from communism and coming from a struggle to have anything. And you have to remember that most of Russia, despite Moscow being incredibly wealthy and St. Peter's being wealthy, the mass majority of that country is really a second world. I mean, it is not first world. It is not what every American city is. And so, this is a mentality of coming from Stalin to Lenin to the fall of communism, and now what is going on there today, which is this kind of socialist kind of democracy, but it's not a democracy at all, but a country that is constantly trying to find its place in the world. And of course, they're very strong militarily, but economically they haven't been. And I think that the mentality, and it's hard to understand it from our perspective, is that that's just how it's done. It's not, you're not in a moral or an ethical situation, it's just how it's done. And the idea is that everybody else is doing it. And even when I started working with Gregory, he looked at it like, well, this is what you do. This is just what you do. It's not a matter of a right or a wrong. It's what you do. And if we don't do this, somebody else is going to do this. And if we don't win, anybody who beats us has done something to beat us and cheat. And maybe he's right. And maybe, but you know, in America, we have this kind of this notion of right and wrong, and this idea of good and bad. And in Russia, it's more like, well, how do I cut the corner, get around it, get out of the ticket, you know? And what you see is kind of anybody that gets in the way of that, whether that was, you know, the oligarch who spent 10 years in jail for essentially crossing Putin, or if you know, do a search of all the myriad and myriad of Putin's enemies that have wound up poisoned, et cetera, that you see that it's really not a free society in that regard. So I think it's not, I'm not justifying it, but you know, if you're talking about somebody who's coming from a system that his mother's injecting him with steroids, and that this is the system, that it's hard to kind of judge it from an American perspective, or you know, perhaps from a Western European perspective, in that sense. At least how I learned to understand it.
Yes.
My name is Kalin. I'm actually from Bulgaria. You're exactly right. And Bulgaria used to be it was never part of Russia, but we had a lot of influence. I used to be a professional athlete. I used to be a professional cyclist, track cycling, and I used to be a national champion of my country on the national team and everything. Many of my friends took steroids. They never told me, but I knew they were taking steroids, and they were not clean, even though they were on a national team. And I know Russia is never going to admit that they've taken or have part of this. I know how the society is. That's why I cannot live back home. Last time I went back home to Bulgaria was actually 2011. And I was so sick and tired of corruption. You're actually 100% right. If you see a cop who pulls you over, you just give him $20 and they let you go. There's no doubt. I've seen it. I lived there half of my life, and I can't live there because I know how bad it is. That's why I can't go back home. And I'm going to school here, and I've been here for about 15 years now. I'm not an athlete anymore. I actually used to play even soccer for down at Itavale University. I made their team and everything. But it is so bad out there. It's so corrupted, and there's no law. Like you said, police here, they're nice to you. They're gonna arrest you if you give them money. Back home, it's the complete opposite. All they try to do is make money, use you however they can, while they can, because they don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow. They might not even have a job or get a paycheck or anything like that. My mom was, she's a nurse. After about 30 years of being a nurse, if you compare the pension that she's getting there compared to here, my mom gets a pension of about $150 per month after being a nurse for 30 years. She was working at a hospital in a different city because there's no law. You cannot chase the big guys. You cannot accuse them. You cannot arrest them. There's no way. She was working for free at the hospital she was working at. She didn't even have. She wasn't getting paid for about 6 months. The hospital declared bankruptcy. Because of that, they never paid her for about 6 months. She was working in a different city. She would go 24-hour shifts. She would never get that kind of pay back for about 6 months she worked.
Really resonated with you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Yes.
So when we talk about, your typical documentary, there's this theory that you're supposed to stay removed from your subject, and this story is amazing because you didn't do that. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, kind of how you made that decision, and if you agree with the assertion that Grigory wouldn't have the chance to tell his story and to make this happen if you weren't where you happened to be at the time you happened to be there. And also as kind of a follow-up, do you feel a little bit played by him? And is there anything there that feels manipulated?
It's an interesting question. First of all, I think the wonderful thing about documentary, which is, for better or for worse, one word encompasses 7,000 genres. There's, in film we have, romantic comedies and thrillers, and documentary encompasses the space of a 10-minute piece on a whale to gorillas in Africa. So, that's kind of cool that you can push those boundaries. And I think for me, and Gregory, my relationship was as I started out that I was going to be the subject of my film, and he was my advisor. And because of that trust, and because he never asked anything from me, and I never paid him a dime, and it was really just a friendship and him helping me on my journey, that when the tables totally shifted, and I realized that my story was not the important story, that the story was about him, the story was about his life, the story was about what he needed to tell. And when that shifted, that he was the subject and I was now essentially his advisor, it was that trust that allowed that, because we literally did a 180 reversal in our roles, and it was not only a dramatic reversal. I became his protector. I essentially became his voice. I became his liaison to tell his story and to bring this story forward. And that was a huge responsibility, and it was very stressful and very scary at times too, because his life was on the line. People literally were, two people, he believes with 100% certainty were murdered, and the scope of what the scandal was. But I certainly never felt that I was being played. I think that he helped me for the purest of reasons, which is we had really just struck up a friendship. And there's a lot of stuff that's not in the film of the backstory before we even get to that Skype call where you see him for the first time, where we truly had developed this just friendship to a place that he trusted that whatever he was going to let me film and that we were going to go on, that when the film was done, I wasn't going to hurt him with it. And I told him that from day one. I said, look, I know you shouldn't be doing any of this. And that is a whole other story why he would set about to help me, because you shouldn't have been doing that to begin with. But I said, look, when the film's done, I'm going to come show you the film. And if there's a risk to you and your job, we'll figure this out. And I was sincere in that. So, when the tables turned, there was 100% trust, and I always put him first, and his protection first, and his safety first. And it was very, very, very carefully orchestrated how we were going to try to tell this story, because he wanted to tell this story. He wanted to be a whistleblower. This was his desire to do so. So, yeah, I don't ever feel played. I feel very fortunate that our friendship allowed this story to come to life, because I believe, if he was still in Russia, if he would have stayed in Russia, he'd be dead. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I think had he fled the country and went somewhere else, I think a lot of journalists would have exploited that story and not sought to see to it that he was protected and work through the process that we went through for 7 months to get to the place that we could even go to the New York Times, and the fallout after that. So, I feel very fortunate, and I care about him quite a bit, and so I certainly don't feel like I was played.
Yes.
I know this sounds like a naive question, but with the kind of watershed event of this revelation of all the Russian doping, but also with all the biking doping, do you have any hope that we are headed toward a cleaner system?
Well, I think that I'll give you an example, the best way that I see it. Cycling, which is what I'm passionate about, is I think the sport is probably as clean as it's ever been at this moment in time, because the testing that's going on is pretty comprehensive. The athletes are in whereabouts programs, and the science has gotten quite a bit better. But I think that it's a blip, and that the bigger issues is that this is always going to be a cat and mouse game, and it's never going to stop, because you have science that is going to continue to advance. And the same thing of how people are figuring out how they're going to live past 100 years old, and how we're curing Alzheimer's, and how we're figuring out what makes you short and tall, and what makes your eyes blue versus brown, and I could go on for hours, is basically all performance enhancing. It's all figuring out how to be better versions of humans, and that's evolution. So, the idea of what is clean or what is not clean is becoming very, very, very gray, because right now, if you have enough money, you can change a million things about your embryo, about the baby you're going to have. You can see to it that he's going to come out tall, that he's not going to have Alzheimer's, that he's not going to have prostate cancer, that he's going to have his eyes blue, and the list goes on and on and on. So the humans of the future, the humans that are starting to come into this world now, are genetically altered or modified. So where does this battle end? Because human beings are evolving. We're not done evolving. So I think that it gets into a much deeper question rather than what is clean and what is not clean. It's what is a pure athlete, because there's so many variables to that. But I think Russia and in regards to state-sponsored doping, where you're an athlete under a system being forced, or that's what you have to do, is wrong. And I do also believe in the rules of and the principle behind clean sport, which is the idea of, hey, we're coming together to try to win and to beat each other, but there are ethics and morals involved in that. But as far as the longevity of anti-doping or the clean or clean sport, as we might like to call it, that I think adds or lends itself to a whole other philosophical conversation involving science and technology.
Yes.
I was dying to know if you ever ended up getting your urine tested to see if it was clean or not.
Well, I got it tested a zillion times. I mean, he smuggled all my urine with him back to Moscow. I brought like 20, 30 samples with me to Moscow after the race. He had built my steroid profile. I had done about 50 or 60 blood tests, which we didn't get into in the film because it just became irrelevant, because what you quickly understand is that, well, if you got some guy on the inside, you can take anything you want and it can go away. So it's not necessarily about the science. It's about, was your urine swapped? Or did you have somebody on the inside that, pushed a button and didn't report you as positive? And there's so many variables in the system that I think that what we see is that it's not necessarily about the test. Because if the system worked, I mean, Lance Armstrong tested clean 500 times. To this day, he's never failed a test. So what we're seeing is just because somebody says they're clean doesn't mean they're clean, and there's 7,000 variables that can see to it that they don't report positive. So my urine became kind of inconsequential in that, but Gregory told me that had he been able to test everything and put it forward, had the other shoe not dropped, he said that I would have tested clean with the exception of one data point out of like 50, 60 tests, that there was one data point that was questionable, but that he felt that if it would have went to like the Court of Arbitration for Sport, that it probably would have been argued that I would have been positive because it was just a single data point. So, yeah, the system doesn't work.
You've mentioned that one of the things that motivated Gregory was that science factor, that he felt a kind of integrity about science, and now he was having to use science to cheat.
Yes. And that was if you say what was Gregory's biggest conundrum was not the cheating element, because for him he always viewed everything as a game of science, which was if you can find a way around the science, it's not cheating, because in his mind and in Russia's mind, somebody else was figuring a way around it. Essentially like the Lance Armstrong of it, meaning, well, okay, now we know that it wasn't just Lance, it was George Hincapie too, it was Levi Leipheimer, it was all of them. Some of them got caught, but a lot of them didn't. And now we're realizing that it was all of them. So if you're going, okay, this is a science problem. So Gregory was looking at it as a science problem. And what we don't get into in the film a little bit is like this test that he develops, this long-term metabolite test, and this is fascinating. So he develops this test shortly before the London Olympics. And this test, which is called the long-term metabolite test, was now before this time, if you had taken steroids, the detection window is they could detect it for about 6 to 7 months, depending on what you had taken. But with this, before they could detect it for about 3 to 4 weeks. With this new long-term metabolite test that Gregory develops, they're able to detect the steroids for 6 to 7, upwards of 8 months in the system. So he puts this test forward, and at the same time, he's developed the anti-venom to his own test. So this test is adopted by every WADA protocol as the new standard to test for steroids, right? And at the same time, every single Russian athlete has the anti-venom to the test that Gregory's developed. So as he develops the test, he's figured out the anti-venom. So all these athletes all over the world are getting caught using Gregory's methodology, while the Russian athletes are not getting caught because Gregory's giving them this 3-drug cocktail, and he had figured out that if you took anabolic steroids and diluted them in alcohol, and basically he was using Chivas for the men, vermouth for the women, because he had decided that women preferred martinis and the men preferred whiskey. So he's diluting the steroids in this cocktail. And so all the Russian athletes are getting away free while everyone else is getting caught. Now, for Gregory, we're better scientists. We've out-scienced you. And so that was acceptable. And when he started having to swap the urine, that's when he had a problem. Because now it was no longer about the science. It was no longer the cat and mouse game. This was just outright fraud. And the way that he says it is that he was their doggy bag. And what he meant by that is he went from being this brilliant scientist to now his job was basically to swap dirty urine for clean urine. And this was no longer a science equation. This was just fraud. And that's where he reached a breaking point. And out of the Sochi Olympics, he was promised that system was going to end and that they were going to go back to the old cat and mouse game of just, messing with the science. They were going to keep swapping piss. But it didn't end. And not only that, it expanded. And we don't get into this in the film. So the Russian lab, before WADA comes in and raids it, he has 16,000 clean urine samples that he's collected from athletes from all over the world in a urine database. Now, these samples should have been thrown out after 90 days. So what Russia was doing is they're collecting any time that an athlete comes into Russia and competes and they test clean, he would save the urine and basically put it into a database with its steroid profile, with its color, with its specific gravity, and essentially make it so that any Russian athlete that they needed to swap, they had a pretty close urine sample that they could swap it with. And they weren't worried like they were in Sochi, where they were going to be reanalyzed because it was an Olympic sample. So if it was just an out-of-competition test, if it was the FINO swimming championships, it was athletic world championships, it wasn't the scrutiny of the Olympic lab. So they would just take a clean sample and swap it rather than what they did with Sochi, where all the athletes had collected their clean urine like a year before. He had 6-7 clean samples for every Russian athlete, so that it was the exact athlete's urine. But what they did after that, when they weren't worried, it was just, he had this spectacular database, and on the eve of the lab getting raided, they have to hire these industrial trash containers, if you can imagine this, and dump and destroy 16,000 of these bottles. And to this day, WADA, nobody even really realizes. He's said that this happened, but I've seen the databases and everything. It's unbelievable the extent to which this scandal was going and operating, and how deep into the weeds they were with this. And the plan was in place to do this at this summer's World Cup. Had this not happened. Yeah.
I first just want to congratulate you. I thought the film was phenomenal, and it was wonderful to watch. I have two questions. You may have addressed part of it, but I wondered why, if you could talk about maybe why you thought it was so important to Gregory to be that whistleblower, and why telling that truth was so important to him. And then from a filmmaker's perspective, I'm curious, you mentioned in the beginning that it's changed from Sundance, and I wanted to know what you changed since then and why.
So the first thing of what changed since Sundance, since we're in Utah and this is where Sundance happens, when Sundance calls you and tells you that your film is being accepted into the festival, it's the greatest day of your life. And you are, it was just, oh my God, because to get into Sundance is the Holy Grail. That's it. That's it. That's what any person who ever goes into making a film dreams, that they're going to get to have their film at Sundance. So that was amazing. And the downside of that is they say, well, the festival's in 7 weeks. And how are you going to get your film finished in 7 weeks? And obviously we had submitted a cut to Sundance, but what we had submitted was a rough cut. And they were able to see through the weeds to see that there was going to be hopefully a good movie there. And then we had 7 weeks, but we just simply needed more time. And so we came into the festival, and the film was as good as we could get to where it was in the festival. And it was, Netflix acquired it, and first thing I said to Netflix is, I said, the movie's not finished. And they said, what? I said, there's a much better movie here. And they said, okay. And I gave them this massive list of things that I wanted to do with my team. It wasn't just me, it was my editors, it was my producing partner, it was my composer, it was everybody on the film felt like we had a better movie there. And Netflix agreed. And so we got to keep working for 4 solid months. So I came out of Sundance, and it was like, yeah, we sold the film and everything. And then I was back in the editorial, for 18 hours a day for the next 4 months. But we changed. The first half of the film is substantially different. We get to the turn, the big pivot in the film where Gregory is in serious trouble now it happens about 40 minutes in. At Sundance, that happened at about 1 hour in. And that 20 minutes of material that not only did we remove and reshape, we put 20 minutes back into the film that was not in Sundance, which is really the story that needed to be told of how it happened. And so in Sundance, we had so many cards that would say, Gregory met with attorneys, Gregory gives testimony, Gregory does this, and we had the footage. We just didn't have the time to craft it on the filmmaking level. And then also the archival footage, as you guys see, there's thousands of like snippets of archival, and that takes hundreds of thousands of hours to find that and put that together. So that all changed out of Sundance, plus our graphics, plus I got to redo the sound mix, I got to do the score. We came into Sundance with a rough score. So I feel like the film took a huge leap from that Sundance cut, which I hope will never be ever seen again, ever, to what it is now. But I guess it was good enough at Sundance that we won some prizes and we're able to keep working on it. And as far as your question about Gregory, remind me what that was.
Why did
you thought it was important that him to be a whistleblower and tell the truth?
Because it's very, very simple. When the shit hit the fan, right, there is a moment in that whole Skype series where you see that clip of Putin going that not only do we deny this, that if this did happen, that we blame the individuals and we will find these people and punishment will be absolute. So Gregory knew what that meant. It was essentially his death sentence, meaning here's this guy who had essentially overseen this spectacular fraud, and Russia knew that there was only one man on planet Earth that could prove it because he was the lab director. So Gregory, and that was all real in those calls. He knew he was basically dead man walking. There was no way that they were going to let him just live. Even if he kept his mouth shut, they were going to have him annihilated. I mean, look at the co-author of the Trump dossier. I don't know if any of you guys know this. That guy he was found dead in the back of a Lexus about 6 months ago outside of Moscow. So, anybody that Russia doesn't want to, that there's a liability, they just die of heart attacks. So Gregory knew that he was basically a dead man. And I think that his desire to come clean was two things. One, it protected him. Once this story was in the world, right, in some ways he had this burden off of his shoulders that it was there. So now if you take him out or you poison him or whatever, right? Oh, you know what happened. Second, he was really distraught when Putin went and invaded Ukraine. And he viewed that he was, as a way, personally responsible for all those deaths because they would have never invaded Ukraine had they not had that success at Sochi. And that success at Sochi allowed Putin, his approval rating to go through the roof and for Russian pride to go through the roof. And it justified him going into Ukraine. And Gregory felt a massive amount of responsibility in that. And the last thing was he had come from a system. His grandfather was killed by Stalin. He was a dissenter and essentially sent off to a gulags and according to Gregory was murdered. And he had seen what the system is there, which is, any dissenter, if you speak out, you end up in a bad place. And when he realized that he himself was going to be pushed under the bus, that's when he decided that he was going to turn the tables on that. So there was, I think, a bit of revenge and vengeance there also. But that's the best way that I think can equate why he decided to truly come forward and tell this story.
Time for one more. Yes.
Well, thank you, first of all, for putting this together. Second of all, Gregory has a fascination with 1984, and I was wondering, how has your opinion changed on Orwell's book before meeting Gregory to now and its applications to today?
That's a good question. You know, I read 1984 when I was in high school, as probably all of you have also. It was just mandatory reading, right? And when you're 15 or 16 years old and reading 1984 in Animal Farm, you can't really comprehend. It's like, you know, reading The Fountainhead when you're 15, you know? Yeah, this is way too, you know, esoteric and philosophical and, you know, I mean, I remember when I read Animal Farm, I'm going, wait, the pigs these are all representatives of humans, and that, you know, it's you don't really have the true capacity to understand that. And so Gregory was always quoting 1984, always Orwell. He's always quoting Orwell all the time. Orwell. And 84 was his roadmap. That has been his manual of life. And yet, not only was he essentially living Winston Smith's life, I mean, he is literally truly in this system where he was never going to beat the man, and no matter what came forward, that the government was always going to win. And that was his life. But as we started working with him, we realized that this was also the framework, the true framework of not only his story, but the bigger story and the bigger political implications. And right as, I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but right as the scandal came out that our election was hacked, you know what has sat on top of Amazon's #1 bestseller for months and months now? 1984. We're living in it. We're back in it. It hasn't changed. You know, we're living in a cycle of fake news. We're living in a cycle where we don't know what is true, what is false. We're living in a cycle of essentially Big Brother, and we're back in it. And so I think that the book and Orwell's vision, sadly, seems to be kind of the state of affair, certainly in Russia, and sadly in this country we seem to be in this cycle of going, wait, what's real, what's true, what's false, who to believe, who do you not believe, and ultimately we're seeing that the government wins, that you can't beat the government, and I don't think you're going to beat Putin. I don't think that he's going anywhere. He's the richest, most powerful man in the world, and it's just so I think it's art imitating life and life imitating art, and so we really latched onto that narrative theme, and it's also Gregory's life, and I'm hoping that the takeaway from this film, aside from its the story of sport and doping and this scandal, but I'm really hoping that the takeaway from this film is that we as a country and also as a global society are not going to tolerate this sort of behavior. And what I mean by that is ultimately, you know, here we're being faced with a spectacular scandal 10 times bigger than the doping scandal, which is our democracy was hacked. Our democracy was corrupted, and the evidence is all there. And what are we going to do about this? Are we going to allow Russia as a foreign power to go and corrupt world politics? What are we going to do? And I'm hoping that people see this film as a keyhole into what the extent to which Russia is willing to go to essentially corrupt geopolitics and assert itself politically. And it's not that America hasn't done the same too, but this is a whole new world that we're dealing in, and we're facing this reality of, and it's right there. So I'm hoping that that the takeaway is echoes beyond the sports world and the Olympics.
Well, Bryan Fogel, congratulations. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you for having